this sounds very sci-fi. You're talking about cybernetically enhancing human beings. What did you see?
Well, I mean, in one sense, it's sort of Elon as usual, and then, in this other sense, it's something pretty incredible. There's been a lot of research in this area for a long time, largely in university labs, and so the biggest thing that struck me is now you see this startup that's backed by $150 million something dollars, inventing new machines and new technology in this area and really trying to push the state-of-the-art forward quite dramatically. And you mentioned the company's only been around since 2017, and so the fact that they already have these devices and papers that they're unveiling seem pretty impressive.
It's one thing to bore holes into the ground, which is what he does with Boring Company, now potentially looking for volunteers to bore tiny little holes into their skulls. How far are they from potentially getting the approval to do that?
Well, they're claiming that they would like to start human trials next year. I mean, the first batch of people that do this are not going to be typical consumers. It's going to be people who've been paralyzed and really have no other options. And so, according to Neuralink, they want to start these trials near the end of next year. The big issue, of course, is the FDA and whether they would approve something like this. Neuralink has a really high bar in that, at the moment, they're just inserting these electrodes. They still have to prove that there's a therapeutic use to this and that they're safe over the long haul. And so even though they claim they might start these trials next year, I think we're many years away from seeing this just being a regular technology.
Ashley, I'm not a doctor or anything, but if you insert foreign objects into your body, doesn't your body react, form scar tissues and so forth? So how is Elon Musk trying to do this?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the big issue with these types of implants. So the existing state-of-the-art thing is about the size of my fist. It has these very rigid needles that go in the brain, and it turns out, obviously with the surgery itself, that original implanting, there's trauma to the brain. Your brain moves a lot as you breathe, as your heart beats, and so it's pushing back and forth on these needles. And this has been the huge problem, is that you get scar tissue and your body reacts to it. So what Neuralink has done, instead of using these relatively big, rigid needles, they've created these they call them threads. They're essentially wires with electrodes on them. They're about a quarter of the thickness of a human hair. And they've developed a technique where they can put this very thin object and insert it into the brain using a robot that has these needles at the end of it. And so it's this technique that they've developed with the robot, and it's this materials advances with these thin threads that's making this possible. And so they claim they can use computer vision and these lenses on this robot to see all the veins in your skull and actually dodge them as they put these threads in.
Okay, let's move away from the imagery of tiny threads moving through my brain and just talk about whether this is a contradiction on the part of Elon Musk, who once called AI more dangerous than nuclear weapons, and now here he wants to merge brains to AI.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard one to get your head around. Besides Neuralink, he's also funded OpenAI, an AI company in the past, and Tesla is obviously pushing its autopilot technology and AI software really dramatically. And then you have this thing coming along. I mean, the way Elon pitched it at the event last night was, AI is probably going to get really good. It could either be a benign technology or it could be an evil technology. In either way, humans will probably want to keep up with the machines. And this is a chance to keep up with the machines, where you become a hybrid type creature. And he said, in the future, people are going to have to make this choice. Do you want to keep up with the machines, or do you want to stay the way you are? And so I guess that's how he rationalizes it in his head, is that this is giving humans a fighting chance, but it's a hard one to square, for sure.
So if we really could have an interface with a computer, with an artificial intelligence that could read our minds, you can imagine a case in which we could be immortal. But that would completely change humanity and what it means to be human.
Merging the human brain with a computer would truly change our species forever. researchers are developing technology that can transfer data between computers and our brains, and even read people's minds. For now, we have the power to detect brain waves and track electrical pulses within the neurons in our brains, and researchers are using this information, however vague, to aid the differently abled and make life easier for everyone. Among these researchers is 16-year-old Alex Pinkerton.
Really, all that we're working on is a brain-computer interface that utilizes graphene, and hopefully, if our math is correct, it'll be sensitive enough to read the magnetic fields of human thought.
It was in the 1970s that the Department of Defense first started funding brain-computer interface research. That market is expected to reach a value of $1.72 billion by 2022. Big players like Elon Musk and Facebook have teased their entrance into the market, while other companies are showing their work in action, like Control Labs, who created a wristband that measures electrical pulses from the brain to the neurons in a person's arm, allowing them to control a computer. New and exciting research is pouring out of universities like MIT and the University of California in San Francisco. So what is a brain-computer interface?
It's a way in which a computer can take information directly from the brain without you having to type or speak it in and translate that into some kind of action.
That's what Pinkerton is working on, a connection between the brain and a device, like your phone or a prosthesis. He was first inspired by his dad, who works on clean energy.
My dad came in to talk to our class when I was in 3rd grade about graphene, just to give a little presentation. I'm not sure why, but that sort of sparked my interest, and I had just been thinking of why isn't this being used everywhere if it's like the perfect material? And so I started thinking of applications, and at first it was mainly for the military or something. Now it's sort of focused away from that into, the brain-computer interface and VR, maybe super immersive VR, obviously could help the disabled.
Pinkerton is the co-founder and CEO of Brain Interface. For the past few years, he has been spending his holiday breaks and the occasional weekend in his dad's lab, working on his graphene brain-computer interface.
I was just at my dad's office after school, and we used a program called MathCAD just to type in a bunch of numbers to fit the characteristics of graphene for a brain interface. And at first, it wasn't working. And so we just kept tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until it finally was able to get to the low magnetic fields of human thought.
Graphene is an almost impossibly thin layer of carbon, only a single atom thick.
We've finished 2 prototypes that haven't utilized graphene. It's just Mylar, which is basically just saran wrap. The first prototype can reach 10 to the minus 3 Tesla, second prototype 10 to the minus 6, so really nowhere near. But this new graphene prototype that's about halfway done, if our math is correct, we'll be able to reach 10 to the minus 15, which is the level of human thought that we need to have for a successful brain interface.
The goal is to have a computer-brain interface that is small enough to fit in an earbud or the inside of a hat, that will allow users to use thoughts to control physical devices, like playing music on their phones or to control a prosthesis.
People know that it could be used for all these amazing things, but they really haven't found the killer application, and I think that's what we've done.
His goal is to keep the cost down so the technology can be available to anyone.
So right now, a lot of brain interface technology is super cumbersome, inefficient, or expensive. So we're hoping to get all 3 of those things sort of out of the way. It's basically, it can fit in an earbud, it can read the magnetic fields of human thought with no problem, and it's relatively inexpensive. You can imagine how good that could be for disabled people. They could move robotic arms just by wearing the earbuds and thinking about it, instead of having, basically their skull opened up and electrodes put on their brain.
Elon Musk's version of this technology might be one of those skull-opening options. Neuralink, a company co-founded by Musk, is working to add a digital, quote, third layer above the cortex that would work well and symbiotically with you.
The purpose of Neuralink is to create a high bandwidth interface to the brain such that we can be symbiotic with AI.
The Neuralink website has been little more than a list of job applications for a while, and an update has been teased as, quote, coming soon for months. But this technology would supposedly require invasive surgery.
What it seems that they've done is they've taken rats and they've implanted this kind of grid of electrodes, but they've done it using a technique that they call like a sewing machine, which seems to like put these electrodes in really, really quickly, because you have to be really specific when you plant these electrodes. But ultimately, what it seems to be for is a way of sort of linking brain activity in these rats to some kind of a computer and possibly to each other.
And the envelope keeps getting pushed further. A recent breakthrough at the University of California in San Francisco showed how researchers can read the brain's signals to the larynx, jaw, lips, and tongue, and translate them through a computer to synthesize speech.
The print that you are seeing is available in words.
And in 2018, MIT revealed their alter ego device, which measures neuromuscular signals in the jaw to allow humans to converse in natural language with machines simply by articulating words internally. But how can you recognize certain brainwaves? How can you filter out the play music command over the constant noise of thoughts and brainwaves?
So when someone says they have a tool measuring brain waves, the first thing I want to ask is, how do you know they're actually brain waves, as opposed to just some electrical changes that happen from the head and neck? Like, for example, from the cranial nerves, the nerves that innervate the head and neck and help you blink or, feel your face. Because the signals from deep inside the brain are harder to get at.
See, in the examples from the University of California in San Francisco and MIT, both studies focused on computers working out a person's intentions by matching brain signals to physical movements that would usually activate in a person's vocal tract or jaw. They're using signals that would usually trigger muscles to simulate what the body would do. The deep internal thoughts and processes within our brain are still quite elusive.
Let's say that we're trying to create a device that allows us to play music from our Sonos or some speaker system in our house, right? So how I would imagine telling the Sonos to do that versus how someone else would might be pretty different. But you could train me to do it.
And that is exactly Pinkerton's intent.
And you can kind of almost teach the brain to do specific things over and over again.
Now, this is not entirely new information. We've been hooking brains up to machines to read electrical activity since the 1920s. And brain-computer interfaces?
These are tools that people have been working on since the 1970s. And there are still a lot of hurdles in terms of making them commercially available. For a lot of these tools, you actually need to sit very still and you need to keep very still. And so that doesn't have a lot of real-world application. So I think that limitation is something that a lot of these engineers really are facing, is how do you continue to distinguish signal from noise when the person is moving? That's a major problem. But I feel like in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more interest in terms of commercial companies trying to create a product that allows this to happen. So, the example is virtual reality. I think that is a pretty clear way in which a BCI might be helpful.
Brain Interface said it has been approached by several technology and investment companies, but plans to finish its prototype later this year before seeking those opportunities.